conference offers opportunities to be updated about developments in all the major drivers of the Nigerian economic outlook. So the first purpose is to get up to date with the facts. What are the main developments? The pace at which things unfold in today's world is very, very fast. Whether you're talking of the global scene or the domestic macro scene, or you're talking about the sectors, or you're talking about states. So 3 months are long enough for you to spot new trends or new patterns. Once we all get to the same speed with what has happened, the second value of the quarterly conference is it offers us to build consensus as to what needs to be done for the different groups. It's more of a peer discussion forum. It's not much of a lecturer situation. Some often ask us, who are the speakers? You don't have speakers. Economic associates provide the information for all to discuss. So everyone is a speaker. Everyone gets to, hold the mic and express views. So we learn from one another. And the level of participation is quite senior. You have industry leaders. You have diplomats. We've had IMF rep in the past among the audience. And this one, we are likely to have the present IMF rep as well, along with another IMF economist. At other fora, she would attend as a speaker, but here, no one attends as a speaker. Everybody gets to speak. We listen to one another. That's a key, difference, So you begin by looking at the summaries provided by EA, and then the rest is group discussion. So consensus. So we get the opportunity to update ourselves. We get the opportunity to build consensus. And the final one is, we have more clarity about where the economy is likely to be headed, what the government might have to do. First, if you look at the global, since 2008, 2009, economic and financial meltdown, the stimuli from the global scene had become divided sharply into two. On the one hand, there is the economic shock coming from abroad, which you can call real shocks. On the other hand, there is the financial shocks coming from abroad, which you can call liquidity shocks. The economic shocks hit us on the current account. Shocks to commodity prices, which leads to changes in our export income. If we pretty much export the same quantity, for example, of oil, but the income we get from oil, it doesn't remain the same because of shocks to commodity. Sometimes the price goes up, so we earn more from exporting the same. Sometimes the price goes down, and we earn less from exporting the same. So this, relating to commodities, is not just oil. It's about the global economy, the balance of demand and supply for commodities. Now, that used to be the main determinant of the outlook, but increased financial integration has meant that financial shocks exert independent influence on the nation's economy, aside from real shocks. And the financial meltdown of 2009 taught us very hard lessons, not just Nigeria, all countries. So we, apart from trying to figure out where the real world economy is likely to be headed, we also look at developments on the financials and look at where, and if you ask me which of the two flows, whether trade flows or financial flows, which one of the two is bigger, my guess is that financial flows are bigger and faster than trade flows. And what leading global central banks are doing about quantitative easing, about pumping money into their own economies to stimulate their economies, has created a glut of liquidity on the global scene. So many countries and companies benefit more from the financial flows than they do from the real flows. So we need some clarity, what's the latest on both shocks and where are they likely to be headed, so that the country, the companies, and the states can position to protect themselves from adverse shocks and take advantage of emerging opportunities. In the last few months, Nigeria succeeded in raising Eurobonds, which means finally Nigeria is taking advantage of global liquidity glut. And we are in the process of issuing diaspora bonds. And we might also open some of the large infrastructure sectors under government control to foreign direct investment. So while things are tight for us on trade front, oil prices and other commodity prices are low, our export income is now about half of what it used to be, we can get compensating inflows from the financial. So while the first one concentrates on challenges and opportunities presented by the world economy, the second one looks at the national macro developments. And we classify that also into two. There are cyclical developments, cyclical swings. You can have downswing in key macro variables, you can have upswings, and there are policy responses, what you might call counter-cyclical policy responses. Last year, on the national scene, we saw a lot of downswings in cyclical variables. GDP growth nosedived, the naira devalued, inflation escalated, and it was a very difficult year in the country. We've not seen devaluation in more than 2 decades, or at least the devaluation of that magnitude we've not seen in more than 2 decades, with the currency moving from like 200 in the official market, in the interbank market, to 300, and the interbank market, it went as high as 500 at a point. Those are cyclical swings, and it looks like a game between cyclical developments and government policies. And ideally, for every cyclical shift or swing, the government should have a response. And the policy, instruments available to them could be fiscal. You could use the budget. You could use monetary policy, or you could change investment policy. And last year we saw that as the cycles inflicted shocks, policy responses were not forthcoming, largely because the government budget itself depended on the price of oil. The price of oil fell, causing the devaluation, drying up the foreign exchange supply, and inability of companies to get forex supply resulted in a recession. And government revenue was, at its lowest, so they couldn't respond. Monetary policy could respond by pumping money, although complications of devaluation meant that the central bank would prefer to tighten, out of concerns about if they eased, it might further, complicate foreign exchange. So the point is that recession required liquidity, and the central bank had reasons not to pumped the liquidity. Rather, they tightened. So you lacked the fiscal stimulus because there was no revenue, and then central bank tightened, compounding this situation. The third policy that government could have used, which I hope now they will begin to use, was investment policy. India, in the face of that crisis, would have eased, foreign investment inflow. Told investors, "Oh, look, this sector, your limit was 0. You can invest 25%, or your limit was 25. You can invest 50%, and they get revenue." India will tap its diaspora to remit, money into government budget. So we are not yet doing active. We don't have investment policy activism, and we need it. So last year, fiscal policy was weak. Monetary policy chose to be pro-cyclical, and we didn't have investment policy. So hopefully, the growth plan is out. The recovery and growth plan is out, and the idea is to try and get more fiscal capacity, and also urge the central bank to be more supportive of recovery, and then to open to foreign investment. That's the second one. Now, while discussions at the global level is aggregative, it's about how the world economy is affecting the Nigerian economy, and discussion of cycles and policy responses are also aggregative. If there's inflation for everybody. If there's growth, we're talking of average growth across board. And if there's devaluation, it affects everybody. We recognize that there are two key groups of activity that deserve special attention in addition to the macro development, and that's one. We have 46 production sectors. And if you say there's a recession, to what extent did this recession affect the 46 sectors? For both government and investors, it's very vital to understand, the sectoral variations in economic conditions. For one, government would like insights to use in strengthening the weakest sectors, and investors want to know which sectors, where is the money in the economy, which sectors are the most promising investment prospects. So we usually devote a whole session to the sectors.